She raised the rifle with steady hands, but instead of aiming at the man, she turned it toward the cracking ridge behind him. Why? The wind cut sharp across the ridge as Clara planted her boots in the frozen dirt, the rifle heavy against her shoulder. Snow hissed sideways, stinging her face. Behind her, Wade's breath came rough against the ground. In front of her, the rider's horse stamped, restless. Clara didn't blink. She shifted her aim, past him, toward the rock wall trembling under ice. Then she pulled the trigger. What she knew, the man didn't. Stay with us to see what happens next. The air sat heavy over New Orleans that afternoon, thick with heat and river damp, the kind that clung to skin and made every breath feel used. Clara Whitfield stood on the front steps of her father's house, one hand wrapped tight around the worn leather handle of a small suitcase. The brass latch had lost its shine years ago. She had polished it once, out of habit. Today, she hadn't bothered. Inside, the ceiling fan turned slow and useless above Harold Whitfield's desk. Papers lay spread across the polished wood, held down by a glass paperweight shaped like a locomotive. He signed the final line without looking up, the scratch of his pen steady, practiced. Ink dried fast in that heat. "You'll take the evening train," he said, as if discussing freight schedules. "Tickets already paid." Clara didn't step inside. The threshold stayed between them. On the hall table beside the silver tray where guests once left calling cards, lay a folded document with her name written in a tight, slanted hand. Beneath it, a single train ticket. One way. No dress laid out. No flowers. No one waiting. A cicada screamed somewhere in the oak trees lining the street. It went on longer than it should have. Clara shifted her grip on the suitcase. The leather creaked. She had packed light. 2 dresses, a comb, a book she hadn't finished. The rest of her things remained upstairs, untouched, as if she might come back for them. She didn't. By the time the carriage arrived, the sky had turned a dull yellow gray. The driver didn't ask questions. He lifted her case, set it beside him, and flicked the reins. The horse started forward. Clara didn't look back. At the station, steam curled up from the iron engine, drifting across the platform in slow white sheets. Men moved crates. A conductor called out destinations. Somewhere a woman laughed too loudly. It all sounded distant, like it belonged to another life she had already stepped out of. She climbed aboard without help. The seat was hard, wood worn smooth by years of travelers. Across from her, a man slept with his hat tipped low over his eyes. A child pressed her face to the window, leaving a fogged circle that faded and returned with each breath. Clara turned toward the glass. Her reflection stared back, still, quiet, framed by the blurred shapes of the station outside. When the train lurched forward, the image trembled, broke apart, then settled again. Fields slid past, then water, then nothing but long stretches of land she didn't recognize. She didn't cry. Night came slow. Lamps flickered on inside the carriage, casting a dim yellow glow that made shadows gather in corners. The rhythm of the tracks deepened, metal striking metal in a steady, relentless pattern. It filled the space between thoughts. Somewhere in the dark, a man coughed. The child had fallen asleep against her mother's shoulder. The conductor passed through once, boots heavy, checking tickets by lamplight. Clara kept hers folded in her lap. She counted the sounds instead of the miles. Wheel against rail, breath in, breath out, the faint rattle of glass overhead. Time stopped meaning anything. Only motion remained. By morning, the air had changed. Cooler, thinner. The train slowed as it climbed. Hills rose in the distance, then mountains, their edges sharp against a pale sky. Snow clung to the highest peaks even in late season, white streaks cutting through dark stone. When the train finally ground to a halt, it did so with a long, tired hiss. "Ridge Hollow," the conductor called. Clara stepped down onto the platform. Dust lifted at her feet, dry and fine, nothing like the damp earth she had left behind. The buildings were low, weathered, a general store with a sagging porch, a hitching rail out front, half the posts leaning. No one approached her. A man spat into the dirt and turned away. Two women standing near a barrel lowered their voices, glancing once before pretending not to look again. A wagon rattled past, wheels kicking up more dust than it carried. Clara held her suitcase close to her side. The wind came sudden, slipping through the street and tugging at the loose strands of her hair. It carried the smell of pine and something colder, sharper, like stone left too long in shadow. She waited. 1 minute, then another. No carriage, no name called. Then she saw him. He stood at the far end of the platform, near the edge where the land dropped away toward a narrow trail. Not close enough to be mistaken for someone waiting. Not far enough to be part of the scenery. Tall, still. His hat sat low, casting a shadow across his face. A coat hung from his shoulders, heavy, dusted along the hem. One hand rested loose at his side. The other held nothing. He didn't move toward her. He didn't wave. He just watched. Clara shifted her weight, the boards beneath her boots giving a soft creak. For a moment, she thought he might turn away, that he might decide she wasn't worth the trouble after all. Instead, he stepped forward. Slow, measured. Boots striking wood, then dirt. He stopped a few feet from her, close enough now that she could see the line of his jaw, the faint crease beside his mouth, like something that had once been a habit and wasn't anymore. His eyes flicked once to the suitcase, then back to her face. No smile, no frown, just a long look, as if he were placing her somewhere in his mind. The wind picked up again, stronger this time. It cut through the thin fabric of her dress, found its way to her skin. Clara held herself still. He didn't ask her name, didn't ask if she was the one sent from the city. He tipped his head slightly, like a man acknowledging weather more than a person, and said, his voice low and steady, "Cold comes fast here." A pause. Then, just as simple, "You'll want to move." Clara didn't answer right away. The wind pressed harder against her back, tugging at the hem of her dress, slipping through the thin seams like it had been waiting for her to step off that train. She shifted her grip on the suitcase again, but before she could move, the man reached for it. He didn't ask. He took it easy, like it belonged in his hand, and turned toward the edge of town. Clara followed. The street narrowed fast. Buildings thinned, then gave way to open ground. A wagon track cut through pale dirt, winding toward the hills where the land rose sharp and uneven. A few horses stood tied near a fence, heads low, tails flicking at nothing. The man stopped beside a large draft horse, dark-coated, steady on its legs. He set the suitcase across the saddle, secured it with a short strap, then looked at her. "Can you ride?" Clara hesitated. The truth sat there between them. "Not well." He nodded once, as if that answered everything. Then he adjusted the stirrup, lowered it a notch, and stepped back just enough to give her space. She climbed up, careful, her hand gripping the horn tighter than she meant to. The leather felt cold. The horse shifted once beneath her, but didn't move. The man took the reins. He didn't mount. They started out that way, him on foot, leading, the horse stepping slow and sure behind him. Clara watched the ground pass beneath them. Dust, rock, patches of grass burned thin by sun and wind. The road bent toward the mountains, narrowing into something less like a road and more like a decision that had already been made. The air changed the higher they went. Cooler, sharper. She pulled her coat tighter around herself, though it did little good. The wind found its way in anyway. They didn't speak. Once the horse stumbled slightly on loose stone. The man's hand tightened on the reins without looking back. The animal steadied. So did she. After a while, the town disappeared behind them. No more voices, no wheels, just the sound of hooves pressing into dirt and the steady rhythm of the man's boots against the trail. Clara looked down at him once. His shoulders were broad beneath the coat, movements measured, unhurried. He walked like a man who knew exactly where he was going and had no reason to rush. "Wade Bennett," he said at last, without turning. Clara blinked. It took her a second to realize he was giving his name. "Clara Whitfield." He gave a small nod. That was all. The trail climbed higher. Pine trees thickened along the ridge, their scent cutting through the cold. Somewhere above, a hawk cried out. The sound carried thin and far across the valley. By the time the sun dipped low, they reached the cabin. It sat tucked against a line of stone, half sheltered from the wind, built of heavy logs worn smooth by years of weather. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney, drifting sideways before it vanished. Wade tied off the horse and lifted her suitcase down. Clara slid from the saddle, her legs unsteady when they touched the ground. She caught herself before she fell, one hand brushing the horse's flank. Wade opened the door. Warmth moved out to meet them. Not much, but enough to feel the difference. Inside, the space was simple, clean. A table near the window, 2 chairs. A stove in the corner, iron darkened from use. Shelves lined one wall, stacked with jars, tools, a folded cloth laid out flat, as if it had been placed there that morning. Nothing out of place. Clara stepped in slowly, boots soft against the wooden floor. She had expected something else. She wasn't sure what. But not this. Wade set her suitcase beside the wall and moved past her without a word. He crossed to the stove, lifted the lid, added a piece of wood, then set it back down. The fire answered with a low crack. Clara stood where she was, unsure what came next. No instructions, no explanation. Wade reached for a tin cup, poured water from a kettle that had been resting near the heat, then set the cup on the table. "For you." She moved toward it, slow. The cup was warm in her hands. Steam curled up faintly, carrying the smell of boiled water and metal. She took a sip. It tasted plain, real. Wade pulled out the second chair and sat, not across from her, slightly to the side. He didn't look at her. Clara set the cup down. "You don't have to," she started, then stopped. The words didn't have a place to land. Wade glanced up, just once. "Don't have to what?" She searched for something to say, something she had been prepared for. "I mean, whatever this is." He held her gaze for a second longer than before. Then he looked back at the table. "It's a house show," he said. Nothing more. Outside, the wind pressed against the walls, low and steady. Inside, the fire cracked again, filling the silence without asking anything of it. Clara sat down. She folded her hands in her lap, then unfolded them again. Her eyes moved over the room, taking in the details. A knife sharpened clean. A coil of rope hung just right. Boots set near the door. Mud brushed off before it had dried. Care. That was what it was. Care without display. Wade stood after a moment and moved back to the stove. He pulled a pan forward, added something from a small tin, and set it over the heat. The smell came slow. Meat, salt, something faintly sweet. Clara hadn't realized how hungry she was until then. She watched him without meaning to. He worked without noise. No wasted motion, no hurry. When he set the plate in front of her, it held more than she expected. She looked up at him. "I don't need that much." He didn't answer. He just nudged the plate a little closer. Clara hesitated, then picked up the fork. The first bite sat heavy. Not unpleasant, just more than she was used to. She ate anyway. Across from her, Wade leaned back slightly in his chair, one arm resting along the edge. He didn't watch her. Not directly, but he didn't look away either. When she slowed, he reached forward and added another piece from the pan to her plate. She stopped. "I said I don't. You need it," he said, quiet. Not sharp, not forceful, just certain. Clara looked down at the plate, then back at him. For a moment, something flickered across her face. Habit, maybe. Or memory. Then she lowered her gaze again and kept eating. Later, when the fire had burned lower and the light in the room softened, she rose to help. She reached for the kettle, stepped toward the door to empty it. The ground outside had gone slick where the frost had settled. Her boot slid. The kettle tipped. Water hit the dirt with a hollow splash. Clara froze. The metal handle hung loose in her hand, swinging slightly. She didn't move. Inside, the fire popped. Behind her, the door creaked open. Wade stepped out. He took in the scene in a single glance. The spilled water, the uneven ground, the way she stood there, waiting. He walked past her without a word, picked up the kettle, and set it upright. Then he looked at the ground. "Ground's uneven," he said. A beat. "Step wider." That was it. He turned back toward the house. Clara stayed where she was for a second longer. The wind brushed past her again, colder now. She looked down at the dark patch where the water had soaked into the dirt. Then she adjusted her footing. Wider. When she stepped back inside, Wade was already at the stove, adding another piece of wood. He didn't look up. Clara closed the door behind her. The latch clicked into place. She stood there, just inside the room, hands empty now, and for the first time since she had stepped onto that train, she didn't know what she was supposed to be afraid of. She only knew one thing. Nothing about this man felt like the story she had been given, and that unsettled her more than anything else. By the fourth morning, Clara had learned the rhythm of the place. Wade was up before the light settled over the ridge. She could hear it through the thin wall, boots on the floorboards, the quiet scrape of a chair, the soft click of a tin cup set down beside the stove. No wasted motion, no noise that didn't belong. He left before the sun cleared the trees. Clara stayed inside. At first she kept to the edges of the room, the table, the chair by the window, the small basin near the door. She moved slow, careful not to shift anything too far out of place, like she was borrowing space, not living in it. By the third day, she started touching things, a folded cloth on the shelf, a stack of jars, each labeled in a hand that pressed hard into the paper. A coil of rope tucked beneath the table, looped tight and clean. Nothing in that house had been left careless. That afternoon, the sky sat low and gray, pressing down on the ridge like it might stay there all winter. The wind had dropped for once. The silence outside felt heavier because of it. Clara took a broom from beside the door and began sweeping. The floor didn't need it. Not really. But it gave her something to do. Something to measure time against. Dust gathered in thin lines, shifting with each pass. The bristles whispered across the boards, steady, almost soothing. She worked her way toward the far side of the room, near a heavy oak desk that sat against the wall. It was the only thing in the house that looked like it belonged somewhere else. Bigger, older, carved along the edges with worn patterns. Clara hesitated before stepping closer. Then she swept beneath it. The broom caught something. A dull knock. Wood against wood. She stopped. The bottom drawer sat slightly ajar. Clara straightened, the broom still in her hand. For a moment, she thought about leaving it, closing the drawer and stepping away like she had never seen it. Instead, she set the broom against the wall. Her fingers brushed the edge of the drawer. It slid open with a low, tired sound. Inside, everything was placed just as carefully as the rest of the house. A small tin box, a few cartridges, coins stacked in a neat column, a folded piece of parchment, thicker than the others, sealed with red wax. Clara knew that seal. She had seen it on her father's desk, on letters sent and received, on contracts that decided things without asking. Her hand hovered above it. Then she picked it up. The paper felt heavier than it should have. She broke the seal. The crack echoed louder than expected in the quiet room. Clara unfolded it slowly. Her eyes moved across the lines. Names, terms, land descriptions written in tight, legal language that left no room for doubt. She found her name near the middle. Clara Whitfield. Not as a person, as part of an exchange. Her breath caught. She read further. The words tightened. Full transfer of rights, custody, seasonal conditions. Then the last line, written in a hand she knew too well. If the subject does not survive the winter months, no inquiry shall be made. Clara didn't move. The paper trembled once in her hand, then stilled. For a long moment, nothing in the room made sense. The walls, the table, the quiet, careful order of everything around her. All of it shifted. The door opened. Cold air pushed in ahead of Wade, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow. He stepped inside, a bundle of split wood held against his chest, boots leaving faint marks across the floor. He stopped when he saw her. Not the way she stood, but what she held. The room held its breath. Clara didn't step back this time. She didn't drop the paper. She just looked at him. Is that why I'm here? Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Wade set the wood down beside the stove. One piece slipped loose and hit the floor with a sharp crack. He didn't pick it up. He crossed the room in 2 steps. His eyes flicked once to the document, then back to her face. No surprise, no denial. Clara held the paper out, not offering it, just making it visible. You agreed to this, she said, quieter now. You knew. The fire in the stove shifted, a low hiss as something inside settled. Wade reached for the paper. Not fast, not careful either. He took it from her hand. For a second, he just held it there, fingers pressing into the crease where it had been folded. Then he turned. He walked to the stove, opened the iron door. The heat pushed out, sharp and immediate. Clara watched. He didn't hesitate. The paper went into the fire. The red wax seal darkened, then softened. The edges curled inward. Ink bled into ash before her eyes. Clara took a step forward. Why would you? Wade closed the stove door. The latch clicked. He stood there a moment, looking at the metal surface like he was waiting for something to settle. Then he turned back to her. You're here because you walked through my door, he said. His voice was low, steady. That's enough. Clara stared at him. The words didn't match what she had just read, didn't match anything she had been told. You took the land, she said. You signed it. He nodded once. I did. And me? Wade's jaw shifted just slightly. You came with it. The answer landed flat, honest in a way that didn't soften anything. Clara folded her arms tight across herself, fingers pressing into her sleeves. So that's it, she said. You get what you want. And you don't belong to that paper. The words cut through hers, not louder, just firmer. Clara stopped. Wade held her gaze now, steady in a way he hadn't before. I needed the land, he said. That's true. A pause. I didn't need you to pay for it. The fire cracked behind him. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing against the walls like something passing through. Clara looked toward the stove where the last corner of the paper had already turned black. Gone. Just like that. Her shoulders lowered, just a fraction. Not relief. Something else. Something quieter. She turned away first, walked back to the table, sat down. Her hands rested flat against the wood, fingers spread, like she needed to feel something solid beneath them. Wade didn't move for a while. Then he bent, picked up the piece of wood he had dropped earlier, and added it to the stove. The room warmed again, slow and steady. That night, Clara lay awake. The blanket pulled up to her chin, the faint glow of the fire shifting shadows across the ceiling. Every sound sharper than it had been before. The wind, the wood settling, Wade moving once in the other room, then going still again. She stared at the dark, turned onto her side, then onto her back again. The words stayed with her, not the ones written in ink, the ones spoken out loud. You're here because you walked through my door. That's enough. Clara closed her eyes. Sleep didn't come. The dark held steady around her, thick and close. The fire had burned down to a low glow, just enough to draw shapes along the ceiling. Every sound felt sharper than it should have. The wind shifting, the wood settling. Wade turning once in the other room, then still again. By morning, the sky had gone white. Not bright, just flat and heavy, like it had forgotten how to be anything else. Clara stepped outside with the tin pail, breath catching at the cold. The ground had hardened overnight. Frost clung to the edges of the fence posts, thin as lace. She walked slower now, placing her feet wider, the way Wade had shown her. The pail filled at the barrel with a dull echo. Water sloshed against the sides as she carried it back. Inside, Wade stood near the table, pulling on his gloves. He glanced once at her footing, then down at the pail. You're getting it, he said. It wasn't praise, but it wasn't nothing. Clara set the pail down. Her hands lingered on the rim a second longer than needed. He reached for his coat. Fence lines drifted over, he added. I'll clear what I can before it sets. She nodded. He stepped out into the cold without another word. The door closed behind him with a low thud. Clara stood there a moment. Then she turned, moved toward the stove and fed the fire the way she had watched him do. Wood angled just right. Air left space to move. It caught. The day passed in pieces, sweeping, stirring a pot that didn't need stirring, folding a cloth that had already been folded. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It held something else now, something that kept her from standing still too long. By afternoon, the wind picked up again. It came down the ridge in long, hard pushes. The trees answered with a low groan, branches shifting against one another. Snow started to fall, light at first, then thicker, carried sideways across the yard. Clara moved to the window. Through the blur, she saw Wade near the fence line, a dark shape against the pale ground. He worked slow, steady, clearing snow from the posts, checking the wire with bare hands despite the cold. She watched longer than she meant to. Then, movement, not the wind. Further down the ridge, near the line of trees. Clara narrowed her eyes. 3 figures. Horses. They moved different. Not like travelers passing through. Not like men looking for shelter. They rode straight. Toward the cabin. Clara stepped back from the window. The room felt smaller all at once. She moved without thinking, her hand going to the edge of the table, then to the wall where the rifle leaned, just inside the door. She had seen Wade use it, watched how he held it, how it rested against his shoulder. She didn't lift it yet. Outside, the riders came closer. The sound reached her next. Hooves cutting through snow, uneven but sure. Leather creaking. A voice carried thin by the wind saying something she couldn't make out. Clara's hand closed around the rifle. The wood felt colder than she expected. She stepped onto the porch. The wind hit her full. Snow stung her face, sharp and fast. She didn't raise a hand to block it. The riders slowed near the gate. 3 men. Dusters pulled tight. Hats low. One of them sat straighter than the others, his coat darker, his posture easy in a way that didn't belong to the weather. He looked up, saw her. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth, like he had found something he expected. "Well now," he called out, voice carrying just enough. "That's a sight!" Clara didn't answer. She shifted her stance, feet planted the way Wade had shown her, weight steady, not leaning. The man's eyes moved over the cabin, then back to her. "Name's Silas Granger," he said. "Your daddy sent us up this way." The words settled slow. Clara felt something tighten in her chest. Behind the men, the ridge dropped away into a narrow cut where rock met frozen ground. She had seen it once from a distance. The way the earth broke there, uneven, holding more snow than it should. She didn't look at it now. Silas nudged his horse forward a step. "We were told to check on things," he went on. "Make sure everything turned out the way it was meant to." Clara lifted the rifle. Not all the way. Just enough. The barrel angled low, not yet aimed. "You should turn around," she said. Her voice didn't carry far. It didn't need to. Silas let out a short breath that might have been a laugh. "That so?" Behind him, one of the other men shifted in the saddle, glancing toward the trees, toward where Wade had been working. Silas followed the look. His smile thinned. "Where's your mountain man?" he asked. Clara didn't answer. The wind surged again, stronger, pushing snow across the yard in thick sheets. The fence line blurred. Then, a sound. Sharp. Not thunder. Not wind. Silas turned his head just as Wade broke through the trees, moving fast, one hand already raised. The first shot cracked through the air. It hit the ground near the riders, sending up a burst of snow and dirt. Horses reared. One man swore, pulling hard at the reins. Silas didn't move right away. He looked from Wade to Clara. Then his hand dropped to his side. Another shot rang out, this one closer. The riders split, pulling back, trying to find space in the narrow ground. Wade stepped forward, boots cutting through snow, his coat open, breath sharp in the cold. "Leave," he said. Just that. Silas's gaze shifted again, between them, between the man on the ground and the woman on the porch. His smile returned, slower this time. "Not yet," he said. The next moment came too fast. A shot, louder, closer. Wade jerked back, his leg giving under him as he dropped to one knee near the fence line. Clara didn't think. She raised the rifle. This time, all the way. The weight settled into her shoulder. Her hands found their place without asking. The world narrowed. Wind, snow, breath. Silas was still turning, still watching. Clara didn't aim at him. Her eyes shifted past him, to the ridge behind, to the cracked line of rock where the snow had built up too deep. Her finger tightened. The rifle answered. The sound rolled across the ridge, echoing back from the trees. Stone shifted, not loud at first, then louder. Silas's horse stamped, sensing it before the men did. What? The ground above them broke. Snow slid first, then rock. A deep, heavy sound as the ridge gave way in pieces, not all at once, but enough to change everything beneath it. The men shouted, pulling hard at the reins, turning their horses away from the falling edge. Silas looked up too late. The path he had taken up now shifted under him, loose and uncertain. He cursed, dragging his horse back, choosing distance over fight. Within seconds they were moving again, pulling away, not in retreat, but in calculation. The ridge settled. The sound faded. Only the wind remained. Clara lowered the rifle. Her arms shook now. Not before. Now. She didn't wait. She stepped off the porch, boots hitting snow, moving toward Wade. He was already trying to push himself up, jaw tight, one hand pressed hard against his leg. Blood darkened the fabric, not spreading fast, but enough. Clara dropped beside him, setting the rifle aside. "I'm here," she said. Wade didn't look at her right away. He just nodded once. That was all. Behind them, the tracks in the snow were already starting to fade. Clara didn't look back at the ridge. Her hands found Wade's shoulders, steadying him as he shifted his weight. He tried to stand on his own. His leg gave slightly, not fully, but enough. She moved closer. "Lean," she said. He didn't argue. His arm came around her shoulders, heavier than she expected. Not crushing, just there. Real. She adjusted her stance, feet planted wide in the snow, the way he had shown her days ago. Step wider. They moved slow toward the cabin. Each step left a mark that filled in behind them, wind pushing snow across the ground in thin, restless lines. By the time they reached the porch, the yard already looked different, like nothing had happened. Inside, the warmth hit them both at once. Clara guided him to the chair near the stove. He sat without protest this time, breath tight, jaw set. She didn't wait. The table, the shelf, the small box with the clean cloths. Her hands moved without pause, pulling what she needed, setting it down in order she hadn't known she remembered. Wade watched her once, then looked away. Clara knelt beside him, cutting the fabric clean where the blood had soaked through. The wound wasn't as deep as it could have been, but it wasn't nothing either. She pressed the cloth firm. Wade's hand gripped the edge of the chair, knuckles whitening for a second, then easing. "Stay with me," she said, not looking up. "I am." The words came quiet. Certain. She worked steady. Water warmed on the stove. A strip of clean cloth torn from an old shirt. Thread pulled from a small tin she had seen near the shelf. Each step came as if it had been waiting inside her all along. Outside, the wind kept moving. Inside, the room held still. By the time the bleeding slowed, Clara's hands had gone numb from the cold and heat both. She sat back on her heels, breath coming slower now. Wade leaned his head against the chair for a moment. "Where'd you learn that?" Clara wiped her hands on the cloth. "Didn't," she said. A small pause. "Just watched." He nodded once. That was enough. 2 days passed before the weather eased. The sky cleared first, opening into a pale blue that felt almost unfamiliar. Snow softened along the edges of the yard. Water began to run in thin lines beneath it, quiet at first, then louder as the day stretched on. Clara stepped outside again. The ridge stood where it had before, though the cut along its side looked different now. Lower, broken in places. The path the riders had taken was gone, buried beneath a fresh layer of white. She walked down toward the edge of the yard. Something caught against a branch near the line of trees. Dark leather, half hidden under snow. She bent, brushed it clear. A saddlebag. The strap had torn loose, the leather stiff with cold. Clara carried it back to the porch. Inside, she set it on the table. For a moment, she didn't open it. Then she did. Paper. Folded tight. Several sheets tied together with a thin cord. The same hand she had seen before. Her father's. She untied it slowly. Read. Not all at once, not fast, just enough. Land, silver. Survey lines marked out beneath the ridge. Notes about timing. About weather. About waiting. And one line that sat heavier than the rest. Remove all obstacles before spring thaw. Clara folded the paper back the way she had found it. Set it down. The room stayed quiet. Wade watched her from the chair, his legs stretched out. Bandage clean, but still fresh. She didn't hand him the pages. Not yet. Instead, she crossed to the small desk by the window, pulled open the drawer, found a piece of paper. Ink. The pen felt heavier than she remembered. She dipped it once. Started writing. Not fast. Careful. Each word placed where it needed to be. A name at the top. A town further east. Cheyenne. A man she had heard spoken of once. A lawyer who didn't turn down a fight when the papers were right. Clara finished the letter. Let the ink dry. Folded it clean. She turned back to Wade then. Set both the letter and the bundle of pages on the table between them. He looked from one to the other, then at her. You sending it? She nodded. Spring roads will open soon, she said. Someone will pass through. Wade studied her a moment longer. You don't have to. Clara's hand rested on the back of the chair. I know. She didn't say anything else. Didn't need to. Weeks later, the snow pulled back from the ground. Grass showed through in thin patches. The creek ran louder now, carrying pieces of ice downstream in slow, breaking lines. The air shifted again, not warm yet, but not as sharp. Clara stood on the porch at dusk. The sky stretched wide above the ridge, streaked with color that faded quick as the light dropped. Her hands rested on the railing, fingers curled around the worn wood. Behind her, the door opened. Wade stepped out, moving slower than before, but steady. He stopped just inside the frame, watched her. The wind lifted a strand of her hair, then let it fall again. You still planning to leave? He asked. Clara didn't turn right away. Her eyes stayed on the path that led down from the cabin, winding out of sight beyond the trees. The same path she had come up. The same one that could take her back. She thought about it, long enough for the question to settle. Then she shook her head. Once simple, Wade nodded. No smile, no more words. He stepped forward, set a folded cloth over her shoulders, the fabric still warm from the house. Clara let it rest there. The sun dropped the rest of the way behind the ridge. The light went with it. But the porch stayed, and she stayed with it. If you had stood there in her place, with the cold wind brushing past your shoulders and a road behind you that led back to everything you once knew, would you have walked away, or would you have stayed? Clara didn't stay because she had nowhere else to go. She stayed because, for the first time in her life, she had been seen without being measured, heard without being corrected, and chosen without condition. Not by grand words, not by promises written in ink, but by quiet things. A man who didn't rush her, a hand that didn't demand, a place that didn't ask her to become someone smaller just to belong. Sometimes, life doesn't hand you a second chance the way you expect. It doesn't come wrapped in comfort or certainty. It shows up as a hard road, a cold morning, or a stranger who simply makes room for you to stand as you are. And if you're lucky, you recognize it. Maybe that's what love looks like out here. Not something loud or perfect, but something steady enough to stay. If this story found you tonight, tell me where you're watching from. I'd like to know how far this journey traveled. And if you believe there are still stories out there that remind us what it means to be seen, to be chosen, then stay a little longer. There are more waiting for you.